Good afternoon, guys. Thanks for clicking in and checking out the exam review. Obviously, you have remembered that we're not meeting on Tuesday, and so this time is to be spent in preparing for your Thursday exam. And remember that John McNamara will be here Thursday night to administer the exam. We're going to be covering modules 1, 2, and then 4 through 9. Remember, we skipped past module 3 initially, and after we complete module 12, we're going to circle back around and hit module 3, dealing with automated deployment options for Windows 7. The purpose of this video is for you to get a feel for some of the topics that are going to be covered on the test. I am not going to give you questions and answers. I'm just simply going to tell you if you are familiar with this particular concept, then you'll be doing just fine on the test. There's about 70 questions on the test, and so we'll be covering information from each of these modules previously mentioned. And if you look for more detail, if you want more detail for what's contained besides what you see here in this video, I would suggest that you go and look at the PowerPoint slides from the individual modules. Then they will hold more detail. But also, I would encourage you to just take some time to read over this material and to be comfortable with it. The questions aren't going to be tricky, just looking to see what you know. And so if you're comfortable with the tools, if you know the principles and the concepts, then you'll do just fine. So let's start off taking a look at what's going to be contained in Module 1. So first we're going to take a look at what makes Windows 7 different. And so we'll look at some of the refinements to the Windows 7 interface. We'll talk about the features that are brand new to Windows 7. That's going to be one of our primary focuses of the test, is what is unique to Windows 7. We'll then talk about the 6 editions of Windows 7. Also, we're going to take some time to look at upgrade options, which aren't just tested in here, but will also be heavily tested by Microsoft. Make sure you're familiar with how Microsoft has changed the interface with Windows 7, say from what we had in Windows XP and in Vista. So be familiar with a different layout for the desktop. The sidebar is gone. The taskbar is gone. Know what a jump list is. Know how to pin items to the start menu. Know how to pin items to the taskbar. Also know these brand new arrow interfaces, so the brand new tweaks there, how you can grab a window and pull it to the top and make it take up the whole screen. That's Arrow Snap, or you can do the same thing by grabbing an app and pulling it all the way to the left or all the way to the right, making it take up then just that half of the screen. Know what the arrow shake is, how you can grab a window, shake it with a mouse, and that will minimize every window except that one. So if any of these don't look familiar to you, go read back over the material, look in the book, look in the PowerPoint slides from that particular presentation, and get familiar with these individual concepts. Know the keyboard shortcuts. Some of these are brand new to Windows 7, like the Windows +1 for the first program, +2 hits the second program, +3 hits the third, so forth and so on. So know these different shortcuts. Now, we spoke in Module 9, I believe it was, about the home groups that are available to us. And so these Explorer libraries tie in with the Windows home groups. And so these are the default libraries you see listed here: documents, music, pictures, and videos. And so be able to recognize, say, a listing of libraries that maybe were to include 1 or 2 options that were not defaulted, so you'll be able to recognize what the default Explorer libraries are. ReadyBoost we discussed in class on a couple of occasions, and this is when we can take a flash drive, we can take an SD card, and we can supplement the RAM on the machine. So if you have something you're doing that is particularly RAM intensive, you can use this so that basically information gets written to the flash drive rather than being paged on the hard drive. It's going to be faster than paging to a physical drive like you'll have with your page file, but it is going to be slower than RAM, and it's also hard on a USB drive. USB media has, solid state media especially, has a limited number of writes, and so this is something that happens a lot, happens very quickly. And so you can burn a USB drive out doing this you should do it very often or persistently. Know what Windows PowerShell is. I know we've discussed it a little bit in class. We haven't really gone into it in any great detail yet. We will towards the end of the semester. But know that this is basically a command line interface that's built for scripting, for helping us to automate tasks. And Microsoft and other third parties provide us PowerShell commandlets, which then allow us to do specific tasks. So just have a cursory familiarity with PowerShell and what it is, and that it is based on .NET. It's the next step beyond the command line interface. Recognize the multiple editions of Windows 7 that are available, and know that there are limitations with these. There's limitations, especially as you start looking at Starter, Home, Basic, Home, Premium. We have limitations on RAM that's available to us. Know the difference between the limitations in RAM for a 32-bit OS versus a 64-bit OS, and recognize that in the questions. If you're asked a question and it just says what's the maximum for Windows, then you better assume that's going to be a 64-bit OS. So, if it doesn't mention what the maximum is, what the architecture is, if it asks you for a number that's the biggest possible, then you're going to know, hey, I'm going to use the 64-bit architecture to answer this question with. If it's specifically one or the other, then that will be mentioned, of course, in the question. Minimum requirements. Make sure and know, what's the minimum processor I have to have? What is the least amount of RAM I can get away with? Now, these are technical minimums. I mean, if you build a Windows 7 box and put it in production with, with a 1 gigahertz processor and 1 gig of RAM, don't tell anybody you took my class, okay? I mean, that would just be a tragedy. So these are technical minimums. Will it work? Yes. Might you have a birthday before it finishes booting? Maybe. So just make sure that you're familiar with what these minimum requirements are, and note that there are different minimums for the different architectures, for the 32-bit architecture or for the 64-bit architecture. Upgrade paths. Know that the only direct upgrade path is from Vista to Windows 7. If you want to upgrade from Windows XP, the only way to do that as far as a automated upgrade process is to do an intermediary upgrade from XP to Vista and then do another upgrade from Vista to Windows 7. We've discussed in class how you don't really fix problems by upgrading the OS. You maybe mature problems, but you don't fix them. And so we're going to prefer to do a brand new fresh install every time. We may find certain situations where we're forced to deal with an upgrade, and if so, then we'll deal with it. But for the most part, we try to avoid an upgrade. Okay, they're mentioning XP. But notice it says wipe and load upgrade only. Okay, so like I said, you could do it with the intermediary upgrade because then you'd be going to Vista, and then Vista would have a supported automatic upgrade. But if you're going directly from XP, the only thing you can do is wipe do a wipe and load. So you basically get everything off of the original machine, and then once you've got the profile and the information off of there, then you will have to do a brand new fresh install and then restore the information that you got off of the original computer. There is the Windows 7 Anytime Upgrade, and this lets you upgrade from one edition of Windows 7 to another. Remember, we've talked about the fact that every version of Windows is on every piece of media. Okay, Microsoft is smart and keeping themselves from having to produce 6 or 7 different editions of the media. They just put everything on one, since the DVD has plenty of room to be able to do that. That means they share a lot of the same binaries. And so what happens then is if you've got Windows Home Edition and you want to upgrade to Enterprise or Professional, then you can do that. You don't have to do anything that you don't have to have anything extra to be able to do that. The only thing you cannot do is you cannot upgrade from a 32-bit architecture to a 64-bit architecture. Okay, when you go to 64-bit, that has to be a fresh install. There is no upgrade to get you from 32 to 34. And it's just a screenshot of what happens with the Anytime Upgrade. And of course, the only thing you have to do is spend money. You'll have to be asked for an upgrade key, which you'll have to purchase. We mentioned here with Vista, Vista Home can upgrade to Windows 7 Home. Vista Business can go to Windows 7 Business. Any addition of Vista can go to Windows 7 Ultimate. And again, when we talk about the in-place upgrade, we're talking about an automated upgrade process where you pop the DVD in and you tell it, I wish to upgrade the existing operating system. It only takes about 25 minutes to do a fresh install of Windows 7. However, you try to do an upgrade, it can take 2 or 3 hours. And so there's really not, I don't really see a lot of good reasons to, hey, I think I really want to do an upgrade. Typically, this is something we're looking to avoid. And like I mentioned, Vista is the only one where we can use a upgraded license, where we can buy a license to upgrade from one to the next. No upgrade pricing from 2000, ME, 98, 95, ooh, Nintendo. And you got to purchase a full version of Windows 7. So unless you own a Windows Vista license, the only legal copy you'll have of Windows 7 will be one you pay full price for. And the modular architecture is they're talking about with what I said, having everything on all pieces of media, as well as they've kind of trimmed up the way they work with the language packs and such as well to try to minimize some of the payload and make this a little bit more of a manageable install. Now, the things we talked about in Module 2, which we will tie Module 2 back into our discussions on Module 3 towards the end of the semester. But we'll talk here about doing the installation, doing a clean install. So a lot of this will flow right from what we talked about in Module 1. The questions you have to ask yourself when you're going to do the installation. Will my hardware support Windows 7? This is a big problem for a lot of companies today because, you know, Windows XP has been around for, what, 7, 8 years now? And there hasn't been a significant OS upgrade. A few people upgraded to Vista, but not many. And so a lot of companies are still using the same hardware they were using 5, 6, 7 years ago when they put XP in. Now, a lot have upgraded the hardware and kept the same operating system, but a significant percentage are still sitting on that same antiquated hardware. So if that's the case, you're definitely going to find yourself getting new hardware as well as getting a new OS here. How is Windows 7 going to affect my applications? It doesn't do any good to upgrade your operating system if it breaks all your applications. And if you have custom apps, then you're going to be more likely to have issues there. You see questions here like, what edition do I install? Do I do an upgrade or a clean install? You know, we always do a clean install if we can. We'll talk about single boot and dual boot in a few minutes. As far as the boot environment is concerned, here we're going to talk about Windows PE. Windows PE is Microsoft's it's almost like a DOS replacement. It's very lightweight. We can put it on a DVD. We can put it on a USB drive and boot a computer up to it. It is a pre-installation version of Windows. You do not have to install it. It just runs right off the media that holds it. However, there is no GUI for Windows PE. Windows PE is command line only. There is no GUI interface. And you can't just go download Windows PE from any place. You can only get it in the Wake, which is the Windows Automated Installation Kit that you will that you can download from Microsoft. So you go to Microsoft's download site and download the Wake, and there you will be able to build your own Windows PE. And we will be doing that later on. We'll be building a Windows PE install and utilizing that in class. It works on the 32 or 64-bit. It has all the networking baked right in. That's a beautiful thing about having all this room we now have on modern media is that, you know, we can have drivers from multiple machines all loaded up, you know, a lot of common drivers. So what ends up happening is that you can take that Windows PE disk and you can go from one machine to another, to another, to another, all with different hardware, different network cards, different video cards, and still have it work. And Windows PE is going to be the platform that we will use to do our images and such for our installs. So, you know, just know a little bit about PE now, but we'll get into it in greater detail later as far as its use in Hyper-V and the Windows image format and such. We're going to, don't worry about that for the test. I shouldn't let that slide sneak in here. A clean install, of course, is always preferable for us, as we mentioned that. Third-party drivers, especially like if you're loading up a Dell box. Dell boxes the drivers never work from Microsoft for Dell hardware, it seems. So during your install, make sure that you and look at that slide. It says Vista. This is out of the Windows 7 stuff, so that's interesting. But during your Windows installation, no disk partitions or unallocated space appear. Then what that says is, hey, the drivers aren't here for your mass storage, and you'll have an opportunity to click on the page right there and choose to install your mass storage drivers. Our options for migration is a wipe and load or a side-by-side migration. So with a wipe and load, you got to get the information off the computer onto some external storage, so you're getting the profile, user's data, off of it onto an external storage media, and then you're wiping the machine and loading it fresh. If you are replacing the hardware, you can do a side-by-side migration where you have the old computer and the new computer right there, and this allows for less downtime for the user, and it also means you'll have less need for external storage. And so if you are replacing the hardware, sometimes side-by-side can be a little more convenient. Know the tools that we'll use to grab the user's profile would be Windows Easy Transfer, or WET, and the User State Migration tool. Know that WET is designed for kind of onesie-twosies kind of situation, you know, where you're just going to do a couple of machines. The User State Migration tool is what you would use when I need to scale up and do 1,000 machines or 2,000 machines. So this allows you to automate the process of grabbing the user's profile information. The USMT, like I said, scales very well, uses XML files for configuration, and is all command line driven. Here they mentioned some of the things you might do to get ready to upgrade. Run the Upgrade Advisor, check the hardware compatibility. All this will be done automagically for you once you pop in the Windows 7 DVD and tell it you want to run and check compatibility. Vista Editions, like we said, that's a direct upgrade. Dual boots. You know, dual boot installations years ago were very popular. You'd see them all over the place. But frankly, if nothing else, virtual machines have pretty much eliminated the need to do dual boot installs. But if you're going to do it, you got to have two separate partitions, two product licenses, and make sure you have a full backup before you start it. Basically, what you have to do is you have to take the newest operating system and put it on first. Nope, I just got that backwards. You install the oldest operating system first, then you put the newest operating system on. That way, the new operating system knows how to handle what's already there and allow for it in the BCD if we're talking about Windows 7, or in the boot.ini if we're talking about previous versions of Windows. So let's see, dual boot, put Windows 7 in the DVD drive, boot from it, and you can run it while the other OS is running. We're also going to talk about the options. You'd have to boot actually to a VHD as well, and that's mentioned. And we'll get to that here in Module 3, the things we want to hit here. Know the difference between master boot record, disk types, and GPTs. So MBR and GPT, a GUID partition table. I'm not going to get into a great deal of detail here. I would suggest that you check the PowerPoints from this module if you want to look at that, as well as, like I said, some of the questions that were pulled from the previous quiz. Be able to recognize the volume types, and we talked about these in class one night, and we built a few of them. Simple, span, striped, and mirrored volumes. Know that a simple volume is made up of space on one disk. And so here you see a disk that's broken up into two different simple volumes, and one has been assigned drive letter C and the other drive letter D. Span volumes allow you to go up to 32 drives and up to 32 physical disks. And you can actually have different size partitions or different size chunks on each of the different disks. This does indeed let you have larger volume and gives you more space. However, there is no fault tolerance here. So if you've got 5 drives or 10 drives or 32 drives that make up this spanned volume, lose any one of those drives and you lose your entire volume. So if anything, it makes the likelihood of data loss greater. And let's see, what else was I going to mention about those? Up to 32 drives. Oh, I know. You get no improved input-output. You get no improved read-write performance. What happens with a span volume is the first disk is filled up completely before it moves on to the second, which fills up completely before it moves on to the third. And so you don't get any concurrency. You don't get any where the controller is reading from multiple drives at the same time. That concurrency is what gives you increased performance in your reads and writes. You don't get that with a span volume because you're still dealing with it one drive at a time. With the striped volume, now we do get concurrency. We get the same amount of space on each drive. And so in this example here, if you've got 3 disks that make up volume set D, then you have the same amount of space on each drive. And let's say we write a 3 meg file to this. Instead of writing 3 megs to one disk, you write 1 meg to each of the 3 disks at the same time. And so that's what significantly increases our read-write performance. However, there is no fault tolerance in a striped volume, and so the likelihood of data loss is actually increased. A mirrored volume, we can set this up from a Windows perspective to hold our operating system. You can't put your operating system on a striped volume, but you can put it on a mirrored volume. And the mirrored volume, basically the downside of it is if you've got, it requires the same amount of space on each of the 2 disks. Let's say you got 25 gigs on each disk that you put into your mirrored volume. So 25 plus 25 would equal 25. The file that mediates this process is called ftdisk.sys, and what it does basically is take everything you write to the front half of the mirror and it copies it to the back half of the mirror. So if you were to lose the front drive, you'd be able to boot to the back half of the mirror so that the machine is back up and running. Know your file systems, NTFS, FAT. You really don't need to get into FAT64. Know that your FAT32 partitions can only go 32 gigs in Windows 7. But that's about it. The disk management snap-in. This is a GUI tool we use to manage our disks. We could also always, of course, use a command line tool, which would be diskpart. But we're probably a little more comfortable with the GUI, huh? We can use the management tool to initialize a disk, to change the partition style. In other words, we can change it from basic disk to dynamic disk. We can change it from an MBR to a GPT. Also use it then to create our volumes and such that we're going to be using. We can do all of these same things with diskpart. And as a matter of fact, diskpart, when we use Windows PE later on this semester, diskpart is going to be a tool we're going to be using frequently. It is command driven, as you can see, but that also means it's very scriptable. So we'll take a look at that. Microsoft has proven to us that they have really bought into what's going on with virtual machines by virtue of the fact that we now have direct support for VHDs. You can go and right-click on your disk management tool and choose Create a VHD. And right there, create a single file that you can then mount as a hard drive. And so we can not only do that with the disk management tool and do it with diskpart, we can even edit the BCD in Windows 7 and boot to a VHD. So you can have the operating system actually boot to this file rather than boot to a hard drive. Here we go. Mounting a VHD is not persistent. If you mount a VHD and you restart the machine, you've got to remount it when you come back in. It's not like plugging in a physical drive and it's always there. And just the shots of the screens you'll see when you do that. And we can edit the BCD so that we're able to boot to that VHD as well. We'll get into that in greater detail later on. Windows 7 driver signing. Remember that forever we've been able to install an unsigned driver in Windows. And when you do, it pops up and it warns you. It goes, oh, you know, do you really want to install this? The driver is not signed, so therefore I don't really know it comes from a trusted third party. This is one place where Microsoft put their foot down where Windows 7 is concerned. If you have an unsigned driver and you are running a 64-bit version of Windows, it will not allow you to install the unsigned driver. Okay, now Tony, this is when you're going to say, yeah, but I know how. Okay, yes, you're right. You can go in and reboot the machine, hit F8 for an advanced boot option, tell it you wish to disable driver signing enforcement. Then you're able, once it boots, to install the unsigned driver. Then you have to reboot the system normally, and now you've just installed an unsigned driver. But Microsoft forces you to go through 2 reboots to do this because they don't ever want you to say, oops, I accidentally installed an unsigned driver. So, you know, you have to go through this very manual process where you're going to go through 2 reboots in order to get this in because they really don't want you to put it there. We already talked about this, getting the driver during the install so that you're able to have the mass media. The device manager hasn't changed in forever. Just know this is where we go to roll back drivers, to update drivers. If there was a problem, you'd see the little exclamation point of the little red circle with the X in it there. None of those, that's really changed. And we're going to troubleshoot a driver. They mentioned here going into safe mode. If you have trouble with a driver, also then I would recommend, you may have to go into last known goods that you've put a driver in and now you can't get logged onto the system. You can go into last known good as an advanced boot option. Now here in Module 5, let's talk about the OSI model. I promise you, you're going to see that on the test. So know the 7 layers of the OSI model. Know them from top to bottom, bottom to top. I don't care how you figure it out. Just know the 7 layers. But don't get them backwards. Okay, remember that they number from the bottom up. So layer 1 is a physical layer. Layer 2 is a data link layer, and it works its way up to layer 7. So don't get confused and number it from the top down because you will get it wrong. Know the network locations. Remember we talked about how when you use a network for the first time, how Windows says, hey, am I at work? Am I at home? Am I out in public? Is this a domain? And basically you choose a location so that it decides what firewall profile it's going to use. Because when I'm sitting at work, I certainly want more features and such available on my machine than when I'm sitting out at Starbucks or whatever. So make sure and know what these network locations are. Know the network and sharing center, that it's more than just an extra 2 clicks to get to the properties of the adapter. Know that you can sit here and see the map of your network, that you can change your network settings. You can go here and you can change the type of network that you're on. So you could click there on where it says example.local and work network. You could click on that and choose to change it from work network to home because maybe you clicked the wrong one when you first did it or whatever. So know that you can go in and change that location. Our IP configuration for IPv4 hasn't changed. We can also manually configure IPv6 if we were so inclined. However, we're typically going to shy away from manual configuration and use DHCP. But that's really more for your server class, which I'm sure you guys will all be in a semester or 2. Hint, hint. But no, from the client's perspective, all we're concerned about would be looking back at this previous slide, using the top option there, obtain an IP address automatically. That's the default. That makes us a DHCP client. Selecting the use the following IP address then forces it into manual when we're no longer looking for a DHCP server to provide our IP configuration. You got to have an IP address and a subnet mask to be able to communicate. Anything beyond that, well, you couldn't. If that's all you had, you could communicate in your own local subnet, but you couldn't get out beyond your network. Know some of the command line tools that we will be using. Just be able to recognize them. NetSH is unique because we're used to using ipconfig to see what the IP address is. NetSH is actually a tool we can use from the command line that will allow us to actually change those values rather than just see what those values are. Here's a shot of the IPv6 settings. And here we go. Here's some of the tools we could use from the command line to troubleshoot our network. So ipconfig, ping, traceroute, nslookup, netstat. Let me encourage you to just take some time and look at those in the PowerPoint slides from this particular module, from Module 5. Module 6, you will see reflected quite a bit on the test, because here we're going to be looking at NTFS and share level permissions. And so we'll take a look at the NTFS permissions, how we determine effective permissions, what happens when NTFS permissions and share permissions meet, and then also what our options are with Windows printing. We can apply permissions. There are file system permissions that are NTFS permissions we can apply to shares, to files and to folders. Share level permissions that we apply to take a folder and make it available. Also, we can put permissions on the registry and on Active Directory objects. So as we talk primarily about NTFS permissions, these principles can be used in all these other areas as well. Know that we use access control lists to apply permissions in Windows. Access control list is a generic term. There are two access control lists that primarily concern us in Windows: the discretionary access control list, or DACL, and the system access control list, or SACL. The DACL is when you right-click on a file or a folder and you pull up properties and you go to the security tab. That's the DACL. On that tab, click the advanced button and go to the auditing tab. That's the SACL. That's where we set up auditing. That's the system access control list. The DACLs and the SACLs are populated with ACEs. An ACE is a user or a group, and then what level of permission has been associated with them. So sales users read, that's an ACE. Managers full control, that's an ACE. Those are all access control entries. And a security principle is any object that can be given access to another object. So users, computers, groups, services, those are security principles. A printer is not a security principle. You can apply permissions to a printer, but you can't give a printer permission to do something. And so therefore it is not a security principle. Here's the DACL that we just mentioned a moment ago, and then you can see the individual ACEs that are listed there as well. Know the difference between standard and special permissions. That a special permission is so specific it's practically unusable. And so standard permission is a collection of multiple special permissions. And the example again is me borrowing Tony's car. If you give me the keys to the car and say, okay, here you go, knock yourself out, use the brake. Don't use the gas, don't use the steering wheel, but here's the keys, you go use the brake all you want. Using the brake would be a special permission. It's so specific it's practically useless. Drive the car would be a standard permission that will be made up of the special permissions. Use the brake, use the accelerator, use the steering wheel. You get the idea. So that's a distinction between a special permission and a standard permission. Now here with this screenshot, what you've done is you've clicked on the advanced button there on the DACL, and you're looking now at the permissions that are available. If you click edit here, that's where you will see the special permissions enumerated. Know that permissions accumulate, that you start with nothing. In other words, well, you actually start with an inferred, with an implied denial. And then any permissions that you are granted then accumulate on top of that. The only time we talk about a subtractive permission is when deny permissions are used. Remember, a deny trumps everything. And so if there's an explicit denial, if someone has in that DACL on that and put in an ACE that says, the accounting group is denied full control, then members of the accounting group can be allowed full control 100 other times, but that one deny trumps everything. So it also makes things more complicated, so use those deny permissions sparingly. We always want to make our life easier by setting up permissions as high in the hierarchy as possible and letting inheritance work. You can remove inheritance. That can certainly be done, but you are going to make things more complicated, so you might want to watch out for that. When it comes to copying and moving the files and folders, just remember what we talked about in class, simmer and semi. Copy, inherit, move, retain when you're in the same NTFS partition. Copy, inherit, move, inherit when you cross partitions. Know how to look at a scenario and you're told, copy a file from this location to that location, from C:\Ernie to D:\Ernie, know what happens. So be able to identify how copying and moving a file or folder is going to change it, going to affect it. There under that advanced button off the DACL as well, the fourth tab you'll see off that advanced button is the effective permissions tab. This shows you what permissions a particular user or group would have for this resource. However, it's just NTFS permissions. It doesn't deal with the share permissions, which we'll get to later. And there's what it looks like. You simply go in and tell it which user or group you want to check the permissions on, and it will show you right here as to whether that permission has been inherited or is directly applied. Now, the assigning a standard permission, here we're looking at the DACL, and you've done this 100 times. You don't have a problem here. But just know that this is where the standard permissions are applied. The special permissions would be under the advanced button, continuing there, but this is where the special permissions would be, the standard permissions would be applied. And here they've clicked on the advanced button and you're looking at the special permissions, and you can see if you look in the box on the right how specific some of these permissions are. Write extended attributes, delete subfolders and files, read attributes, read extended attributes. And so in addition to being very specific, they're also very plentiful, and so they can make things really complicated. You don't use special permissions very often. 99% of the time, standard permissions are just fine, or all we need. But the special permissions are there if you need them. We talked about setting up a home group. This basically allows you to share the libraries that are in your user's profile. We've got the 4 default libraries we looked at earlier. You can add your own. Be able to recognize the default libraries, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. When you create a home group, everyone has read-only access to the contents of those folders by default. You can change it, but their default level of access for other members of your home group will be read-only, so they can get to the music or the pictures or whatever you've put up in those folders. And if they want to join your home group, there'll be a password that they'll have to key in. You'll see how that gets generated here with this screenshot as you create the home group. And here you can see just changing the permissions for the home group. Just remember that the default is that everyone who belongs to that home group has read permission. And so if you want to give them read-write, then you can, but the default will be read. You also have a public folder available in your Windows 7 box. Wouldn't really recommend using it, but it's there. And if you turn on network discovery and public folder sharing, then they can get to anything you put on that public folder in your machine. Now here's the sharing interface. This really hasn't changed. They have added this. So if you just click the share button, that's the one on the top, they've added this really super simplified interface that I just really hate. And so I would suggest you hit the advanced sharing button, and that's what gives you the little box you see there in the lower right-hand corner. That's an interface that we're accustomed to. Share permissions accumulate just like NTFS permissions accumulate. And so the default permission, know this, the default permission now is everyone read. That is different from previous versions of Windows, which were everyone full control. So the default permissions are now everyone read. When we combine share and NTFS permissions, remember, you accumulate the NTFS permissions, then you accumulate the share permissions, then you compare the two. The most restrictive permission then becomes the effective permission. But you can't go looking for the most restrictive until you've accumulated in each family of permissions. I would encourage you to go back and take a look at the PowerPoints from that particular module, and you'll see that covered in greater detail there. Now, a couple of notes about printers. We talked about the print architecture. In other words, we talked about, remember how Microsoft's, we have a print device. The printer is a software interface, and the print device is a piece of hardware that actually spits out the paper. Make sure you keep that distinction in mind, John, just on my test, but on Microsoft tests as well. Adding a local printer hasn't changed since Windows 95 practically. Sharing a printer, this interface has basically stayed the same. We do have the print manager interface now, which is an extension of this, gives you a little more control. But the actual, wizard of creating a printer and the property sheet of the printer really hasn't changed. Know the permissions for a printer. Print, manage this printer, manage documents. The default is everyone print. Manage printer means that, well, let's go to manage documents next. Manage documents means that you can, in addition to when you print, you can delete and reprioritize your own jobs in the print queue. When you have manage documents permission, you can delete other people's jobs in the print queue. And then the next one above that would be manage this printer, which means you can do all the management plus of the documents, plus you can actually change the settings in the driver for the printer as well. Module 7, we spoke primarily about Internet Explorer. Maybe not our favorite browser, but certainly Microsoft's browser, so we need to be aware of what our options are for administering and maintaining that. Read over these different options of views, the search options, the accelerators, the RSS feeds. Know that the printing has been improved with IE 8 and 9. Look over the security. I know there's a few questions that deal with security for Internet Explorer. So take a look at the zones, the protected mode, in private filtering, in private browsing, pop-up blocker. Know these zone types and what they're for. Know that if something is not listed in local intranet, trusted sites, or restricted sites, it goes in the internet site. The internet site is the giant bucket that holds everything that you don't put in one of the other three places. In private browsing and filtering allow you to basically be online without leaving any trace of where you were from that machine. Often referred to in the corporate world as porn browsing because it makes it easier for people to go places where they shouldn't, especially at work, and obfuscate that fact. In the group policy objects, however, we can eliminate this setting for the user, so we can take the ability to enable the in private off of their machine so that they're unable to do that. Know the compatibility settings, how we can basically trick an application of thinking it's running on a previous operating system. We can force particular settings to its screen resolution, color density, so forth and so on. Know where that is. Application restrictions, know SRP and App Locker. Know that software restriction policies go all the way back to Windows XP. App Locker is going to be just for Windows 7. And basically this allows us to whitelist and blacklist the applications that the users would be allowed to run. We do this by rules, and I mentioned here we've got certificate rules, hash rules. Certificate rule, basically you're saying, hey, if the app isn't signed with this particular certificate, you can't run it. Hash rule says, let's do a hash rule last. Path rule would say you can't run something if it's in this particular location or if it's not in this particular location. The reason I said to save hash for later is because what happens with the path rule is if you say, hey, you can't run sol.exe, solitaire, you can't run that, but the user's smart enough to rename it or to move it to a different location, then they could run it. With the hash rule, an MD5 hash is ran of the file's contents, and so if they attempt to run it, the hash rule would still stop them, whereas the path rule would not have. And we can also do network zone rules, so that basically it says, think back to the Internet Explorer zones we just mentioned, that if it's in the local intranet, then it's okay, or if it's in a restricted site, then it's not. So we can use those zones as well. App Locker is just Windows 7 and later, like I mentioned. No Module 8, and we talk about doing updates. Know the importance of doing your updates. Know why you got to be responsible for those. Know the different types of updates that are out there and available to us. Hot fixes, security updates, the roll-ups and service packs. So read over, we talked about what's contained in each of those and what the different characteristics are of the different update types. Know that we can apply updates through Windows Update, through SCCM, or through WSUS. Know that the best place to configure your clients for WSUS is from the group policy object. Do I need to repeat that? From the group policy object, so make sure you read that. Oh, there we go. The event viewer has changed from previous versions of Windows to now. It basically looks the same, but the bones have changed. It's now all XML based, and so be aware of the standard logs, the application security setup and system logs that are there, and then know that there's tons of other logs available, and we'll explore those some more later. ReadyBoost we mentioned earlier. It just kind of came back here to haunt us. And then the final module that we're going to be concerned about with the test is Module 9. This is when we talked about users and groups and UAC. So just know the purpose of a group is basically a bucket you're going to put users in. Know that it's important as to whether that group is on a local machine or on a domain-based machine. Know that we've got on our local and domain environments as well. So we already talked about the home group a little bit. Be able to make the distinction between a work group and a domain. Know that a work group is basically peer-to-peer, that every machine is equal. Know that with the work group, that if you have 10 machines, you've got 10 user account databases that have to be synchronized and maintained if you're going to be sharing information back and forth. As opposed to the domain, whereas in a domain environment, you've got a centralized security accounts database. And this, in normal cases, this will be Active Directory, or at least in what would be normal in today's corporate environment. Active Directory would be our domain directory, our domain-based directory service, and that you have to have at least one domain controller, and don't have just one domain controller, or I will hunt you down. Know that local user accounts are good only on that local machine. You can't give a local user account on machine 1 the ability to access a resource on machine 2. That's what domain accounts are for. So with domain accounts, then we're able to affect resources on any machine that belongs to that domain. Here's the property sheet of a local user. Nothing too exciting there. Know that there are 2 places you can do this for the local user. Let me see, did I get that up here? Maybe I'll find it in a minute. Okay, my fault. Know that you can do it from the control panel and the user's applet, or that you can right-click on computer, go to manage, and then click on local users and groups. Really, the interface in the control panel is super simplified. You're going to get all the control that you would possibly need by doing it through the MMC, by doing it through the computer management, local users and groups, and that's where really we'll encourage you to work, and that's where we'll be doing it here for the class. Now, here's a great slide showing us that, hey, our domain accounts, like we said, are spread out through the entire domain. They are a common database that all the machines share, as opposed to individual machines like we had for the local user. And you'll notice that the property sheet for a domain account has much greater detail to it. There's many more things we can do to it than just what we're accustomed to with the local user. And again, when you guys are in the server class, and that's something that will be of significant interest to us. Built-in local user. Every machine has a local built-in administrator and a guest. Both of those accounts, administrator and guest, are by default disabled. When you install Windows 7, it asks you what your name is, and basically what it's doing at that point is it's creating a user in your name and putting it in the local administrator's group. The local administrator account is, however, still disabled. And that is certainly more secure, because if somebody wants to get into your system and you leave the administrator account enabled, they know half of what they have to type in to get access, and Alvin needs your password. So that certainly is a good thing. Keep in mind the principle that the local user and group is only good for resources on the local machine, as opposed to the domain where it's good for any machine that's a member of that domain. We also have built-in local groups on the machine. These groups, by default, they're all empty except for the administrators group. Well, I guess the guest group has the guest account in it. And then everybody goes in the users group. Anyone can create it on that computer. But backup operators, power users, remote desktop users are all by default empty. We spoke about special identity groups, or system groups as they're also referred to. And basically, these are groups that we can do nothing to control their membership. You belong to one of these groups based upon your activity on the network. It's nothing you do. It's simply, it's nothing that you can do as far as someone assigning a membership. It's simply a matter of what are you doing on the network. So when you log on to a domain, you now belong to the authenticated users group. However, I would belong to the Everyone group. If I were to sit in your lobby and plug my laptop in and just turn it on, I would be a member of the Everyone group. And so you can see why the Everyone would be inherently less secure than authenticated users. And so all of these groups, we cannot control the membership of them. Membership of special identity groups is based upon what you are doing on the computer or in the domain. Here's the slide I was looking for earlier. So the two places where you can go on the local machine and control your user accounts is the user accounts applet in the control panel, which is really for the noobs, and then local users and groups, which is an MMC snap-in. You'll find that under the computer management tool, or you can just fire up your own MMC and dock the local users and groups in there. Here's a shot of what you get in the control panel, which, like I said, is pretty wimpy. And we get a lot more control here. So this is where we go take a look at the properties for under computer management for the local users and groups. And that MMC-based tool is really the one that you want to be using. You don't want to handle it in the control panel. Use it here. You can do everything you need to do. Creating an account, simple. Again, if you're sitting right here, you would just right-click there in the white space. You've got the user section selected on the left. So you look in the center pane, the detail pane in the middle. You right-click in the white space and choose New User, and you get this little wizard. Simply populate the information in the fields requested, and you're done. Mention here you can do everything you could do in, you can do an awful lot of what you could do in the control. You can do everything you could do in the control panel here. But they mention here you can change all the user's properties except for the username. You can't change the username. That you would have to delete the user and create another one. You can change group membership here, which you can't do in the control panel. You can also manipulate profile settings here, which you can't do from the control panel. So a lot of things that you need to do potentially that you just can't do from that control panel tool. Local groups, same thing. You just right-click on the groups folder instead of the users folder and choose New Group. And then you can also populate the membership list there as well. Know what a profile is and know the three types of profiles: a local user profile, a roaming profile, and a mandatory profile, and know what distinguishes each of those three. Finally, user account control. Know that we do not want to just turn UAC off because it would certainly leave us vulnerable. User account control basically allows us to run as a less than privileged account even when we're logged on as administrator, and then elevate those permissions when it's necessary. And you can go in to the group policy object or to the control panel and affect how sensitive you want UAC to be. And here you see the result of that, where basically if you're logged on as a standard user and you go to do something that requires administrative credentials, then you're going to get challenged, hey, give me a logon, give me a password. However, if you're already logged on as administrator, it's just going to give you a little box that says, hey, are you sure you really want to elevate and do this? So what I want you to do is read, okay? Read this stuff over, go back and review the PowerPoints from the previous modules. I cannot stress enough the importance of looking over the quizzes that you've taken up to this point. You will find a large number of the questions on this test come directly from the previous quizzes. So read over those previous quizzes so that you know exactly what to expect for test time. All right, study hard, do well, and I will see you guys next Tuesday, okay? Thanks a lot.